Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. That was certainly an introduction to raise expectations. First of all, pleasure to be here. I suspect about 60 or 70% of the audience in the room is private sector representatives, I'm being told. So I will do my best to relate to private sector in my speech, because you really don't want to hear the official version that's going to be displayed in New York in a week's time, because you probably will find it less relevant for your day-to-day needs and aspirations. As a former business person myself, who came to the UN from private business, I hope I can partially relate to what the discussion in the panel will be all about. But first, let me just put what we're talking about into context. I'm not going to go through with you the 17 goals, or God forbid, the 169 targets. The chair was somewhat ungracious about describing it as wishy-washy and everything in the world except motherhood and apple pie. Look, it is what it is because the world decided this is what it's going to be. It's not the UN presenting it to you. It is all of our governments collectively agreeing, and India being one of the leaders of this movement, to a comprehensive package. It is actually much more concrete than you would imagine. Roughly, grosso modo, India is already working on 11 or 12 out of 17. So it's not an alien body being brought in and embedded into the Indian development strategy. And frankly, India does hold a number of keys to this, as the chair referred to a minute ago. Now, what is different about this set of agreements compared to everything we've had in the past? And this is really, really underappreciated, and people don't talk about it much. But it is the global nature of the agreement. It's not the North talking to the South anymore. It's not the masters and the servants. It is an equal dialogue in the world with differentiated responsibility for what happened in the past. True. But still, it is an equal dialogue where countries talk to each other, and globally in the UN and elsewhere in international fora as equals, because we're all in the same boat on the sustainability issue. I mean, frankly, I don't think we need to be terribly scientific about talking about sustainable development goals, because every one of us individually, when we sit at home in the evening with our kids and our families, can relate to what it means. It means elimination of poverty that we see every day around us. It is reduction of inequalities, because inequality is actually bad for business, believe it or not. But those of you that have studied the issue will agree with me, it's scientifically proven. It is the sustainability of our planet, so that our kids inherit something where they can walk out into the forest and enjoy nature, as opposed to being choked to death by pollution. It is all of these things together that we can relate to on a very personal level that comprise the SDGs. The rest is numbers and tables and targets and statistics, which are relatively important for tracking and for global comparisons, but frankly, for this discussion, it is less important than anything else. Second point I want to make is the MDGs were partially achieved, and some countries have had notable successes in them. And generally, we can state that it was a very progressive and successful agenda, but the partial success of the MDGs was in large measure due to the success of China. The SDGs put the same pressure on India. Without India, the SDGs are statistically unachievable. So here, India and the UN are in the same boat. There is a lot of pressure on us to deliver on the agenda and to come up with some solutions and facilitate this process, but there's a lot of pressure on India, because without India, it's an impossible proposition. Let me leave you with that thought. There is also the unfulfilled agenda of the MDGs. So what the speaker said about poverty, what we've referred to also as, health goals, et cetera, needs to be fulfilled, because they become part and parcel of the next agenda. I've already mentioned inequalities. You in business know that poverty is not good for business. I have arrived in India only a few months ago, but every time I speak to a business person here in India, I hear the same thing. Business person, foreign or domestic, I cannot get enough qualified staff, workers, etc., 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 on my shop floor, in my factory, in my design bureau, etc., etc., etc. So you know that lack of education, lack of opportunities, lack of skills, lack of knowledge is bad for business. A society where you have a universally educated workforce, a universally healthy workforce, let me even dare say a universally happy workforce, because a colleague of mine on this panel will speak about staff happiness, won't you? And they've achieved almost 80% of it, allegedly. But without that, you cannot practice a successful business in India or, frankly, anywhere else. An educated workforce also is present in government, which facilitates work for business, because they understand that public sector can only do so much. Public sector is not going to implement the SDGs. The public sector, at best, is going to create an intelligent, enabling environment, is going to create a policy framework where inequalities are addressed through various means, through public investment and through appropriate taxation, hopefully not too taxing for business. But ultimately, it is business that is going to implement the SDGs. I'm sorry, think of the problems of India. We need to build 60 million homes for the poor in the next 7 to 10 years. How do you do that without business? It is, again, statistically impossible. I think the idea that people are going to build 60 million homes for themselves with the quality, sustainability, energy efficiency, disaster risk proofing, etc., 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 I think is a pipe dream. It will never happen. India has been trying to do that for a number of decades, and I don't think we are there yet. So thinking that we can do this without 21st century technologies of prefabricated housing and new materials and new access to energy, off-grid or on-grid, is an impossible proposition. How does business find a deal with the government and the communities that which it serves to implement such a daunting task? How do you educate and skill 20 million people a year? Again, the government cannot do it. Business will have to do it, because it's in business's self-interest to have 1,000 welders come online this year because you are staffing a new factory, or assembly workers, or workers working in a cement factory, whatever it will be. But without business, nobody can educate 20 million Indians every year. How do you achieve a target of 170 gigawatt of renewable solar power? These facilities need to be owned by business. The scheme needs to be profitable. The tax, the feed-in tariffs need to be reasonable for you in the room to take the risk to invest 20, 50, 70, $100 million into a project of renewable power that's just going to generate solar for the next 20 years or 50 years. So my point to you is, don't overcomplicate this agenda. I think as business people, you are also individuals. As individuals, you see the future. You see what is coming for your families, for you individually, and for your business. I think the agenda is frankly quite simple. How do we reduce our negative imprint on this planet? How do we do it quickly but profitably? And I think some of the business leaders here and BMW and others will speak about how they're attempting to tackle this challenge. How do you ensure that societies in general, and India in particular, are more egalitarian, more equal, more educated, more healthy, more forward-looking, more creative, which ultimately, again, contributes to success of business? How do we ensure that our environment and our region is peaceful, allowing trade to prosper, allowing infrastructure links to happen, allowing us to travel widely without restrictions? That also improves both the success of business and the happiness and education or awareness of the population. So I don't think we need to complicate it enormously in order to understand what this agenda is all about. Last but not least, because I'm exhausting my 10 minutes and I would rather have a question and answer session with all of you than speak from the podium. The issue on taxation and movement of capital. Look, this is a serious issue, and business will not be able to avoid it, especially international business. if we say that the success of the SDG agenda depends on domestic resource mobilization, and at the same time we're saying, well, every year, anywhere, depending how you calculate, between 200 billion and $2 trillion leave India legally or illegally, then you have a problem on your hands. It's a global issue, tax flight, whether it's legal intercorporate transfers, or whether it's gray transfers, or whether it's black transfers. It doesn't matter. But without resolving that issue equitably, so governments are happy, business is content, and the resources stay to an extent in the country where they were generated, I think it's a long-standing issue that will be there. India will push it on the international agenda, but I think business needs to be prepared for the resolution of this issue. And that is a key thing. The other key thing is technology. How do we allow technology to flow freely to where it's needed within the context of the current regime of intellectual property rights? Business needs to make money because they've invested 100 million into an R&D. But how do you ensure that that cost is recovered, a reasonable profit is made, but then technology is made available? Sitting on a technology for 20 years, not allowing it to be used, is not going to be the solution. I mean, you see what happened to the pharmaceutical sector, and India led the way in the pharmaceutical sector. It is going to be either through a consensual agreement in business globally, or it's going to be through kind of break the wall type of tactics. But it's going to happen anyway, might as well be prepared for it. Let me leave you with those two thoughts: financing, technology, and the third one, which I mentioned at the beginning, the global nature of this deal and this dialogue, and I think we can pick up the rest in the debate and the discussion. Thank you very much.